Hi there, it's Carl Irwin, the Common Magician, and I'm on vacation. I'm up on the family farm, and I have a moment here to do a little bit of a video on a topic. I've not been creating a whole lot of content lately over the last year or two. I've just been very, very busy. I've been doing a lot of other things, particularly dealing with music, writing a lot more film score these days. So in terms of where I'm spending my free time, I'm spending it just in some other areas. But I've not left this. I'm not closing down the channel. I'm not pulling back. I'm not releasing a lot of product material anymore. I haven't had any really, I think, novel ideas to share in that way. So that's just the state I'm in right now. We're keeping this to just a few infrequent videos every now and then. Certainly you can look back on the channel and review any of the older videos I've done. And not to repeat topics, but we are going to talk about an issue here, and in a very broad sense. We'll title this Making Sacrifices. And what this is really about, this is about thought of freely named cards, a topic we like to talk about on the channel. And usually when we talk about freely named cards, freely thought of cards, we're dealing with high-powered methods that give us really absolute control over truly freely named information. So some of those methods would include an index, some kind of an index where you have cards or identities that have been recorded, filed away on your person somewhere where they can be rung in, brought out based on whatever response the spectator is giving. Other options would be some kind of a memorized deck, or a stacked and memorized deck, or it doesn't even have to be memorized, but just a stacked deck that's in a known order, not necessarily known card for card, but a known order, is in and of itself an index. It's an index that is very in the open. It's not hidden away. It is not something that is concealed. It's actually in the open, but its understanding is not in the open. It may appear to be shuffled. If you look at it, it may look like everything is out of order, but in truth, in reality, it's in some kind of known order that can be accessed based on whatever the spectator is responding with in terms of their input. These are high-powered methods, and I'd say one more high-powered method would be the use of apparatus that allows one to create what would appear to be a prediction that is actually after the presentation of freely thought of information. These are mentalism kinds of devices. It could involve a writer, a thumb writer, a nail writer, some kind of thing, pocket writing, which we've discussed very little bit on the channel. That might be something we look at in the future, is nail writing, thumb writing a little bit more, because it's something I do like to do. That would be one way. And then there is one more I have to point out, and that is the illusion of freely thought of information, and this would be known as forcing. So forcing information on someone using, I think, more sophisticated means that allows the spectator to truly feel as if they have made their own input. So you can use controlling language, equivoque, limitation of choices, these kinds of things that are not an all-out force, which would be a different kind of selection that is randomized. That is to say, the spectator feels like they've randomly chosen a card, not knowing its identity, look at it, and they think about it. Not that kind of a force, but perhaps a kind of force where they are offering apparently free information, but really the selection process is organized such that they funnel down into a specific outcome that is preordained. These are the high-powered methods for dealing with freely thought of information. I want to look at something different, and this is why it's called Making Sacrifices, this video. At some point, when you are creating a magical effect, every single time in every case, you have to make sacrifices. You're going to have to sacrifice something. We've all had that moment where we see some kind of effect that's in the marketplace, or we've heard about something, or we've seen a performance, we try to work it out, we learn what the secret is, either by purchasing it or having a conversation or working things out on our own, and we find ourselves disappointed with the method. And we're disappointed because it isn't really free. It really isn't fair. There is some kind of major sacrifice that had to be made. And whereas we couldn't notice or recognize the sacrifice in the original viewing, knowing what the sacrifice is after the fact is disappointing, because we know, well, there's a no man's land. There is a place where we really cannot go. There are limitations to our presentation that we have to stay within in order to make the effect work, and that feels uncomfortable. Completely forgetting the fact that we did not recognize that, notice that, or sense that when we first saw the effect, which is how real spectators see an effect. There are sacrifices. You have to make one somewhere. So what I want to talk about today is the sacrifices that may be necessary if you want to work with freely thought of cards with a shuffled deck in use. Why limit yourself to a shuffled deck in use? I remember there was a time 10, 15 years ago where mem deck card magic was really exploding. It wasn't invented at this time. It had existed for decades before, nearly 100 years before. But for some reason, with the writing of new material from very charismatic individuals, mem deck work kind of blew up again. A lot of magicians started doing it. Mnemonica was all the rage, probably still is for a lot of magicians. And anybody who was doing thought of card magic was using a memorized deck, and you had to memorize that order. It couldn't really be anyone. You weren't one of the cool kids unless you did that. And if you were going to do freely thought of card magic, that was the way to do it. I want to get away from that. There's necessarily no reason to have to do magic that is as powerful as that, and having to use a memorized stacked deck. That in and of itself has limitations. It means that there's a certain type of card magic you have to either avoid or you have to preserve for later in a routine. And once you do those other effects that require a mixed up order, then you have to go do a hard reset of the deck before you can repeat. So there's a lot of people who prefer to work with a shuffled deck that's in use. They want to be able to maybe work with a group over here and table hop to another place and do the same lineup of effects without having to do any kind of reset and without having to pigeonhole themselves into that kind of magic using a stacked deck. The late, great Harry Lorraine, who we've mentioned before, very interesting personality, very bold, some would even say very arrogant personality. If you've ever had any encounters with him, either in person or online, he was very open online and on the forums, and you could really strike up a conversation anywhere that he was. He made a major point later in his career that he would only ever use a borrowed deck of cards. That's all he would ever use, is a borrowed deck. It was kind of a badge of honor that he wore, that he would say, I only ever work with a borrowed deck of cards. Well, as you and I know, that never happens unless you're a professional magician at conferences and other magicians are swarming to you to glean information, and obviously they will have cards and you can use their cards. That was the life of Mr. Lorraine. That's not our situation. Using a borrowed deck is an unheard of idea. It's absurd to think that you would be in a situation that isn't at a magic convention or in a club or someplace like that where you would have a borrowed deck. Perhaps maybe if it's game night or you have a situation where there's a game shelf in the living room and you can see a deck of cards, maybe in that situation. I'm thinking more about the person who just wants to do magic with a deck of cards where they can turn it over to the spectator, let them shuffle, the order doesn't matter, things can be mixed up, it is in use, and you're going to do some magic in that environment and have really no apparent control that can be sensed by anybody. That's what we're talking about. And some people really do prefer that kind of magic. There's a really great a series. I think Liam Montier put out. It's not very expensive. It's a video series. It's called Any Shuffled Deck. I can't remember what it was called. You have to look it up. It's about doing magic. It's just a series of maybe a dozen tricks that are done, and mostly it's the concepts you're trying to learn from that resource, where you're only dealing with a deck of cards that is shuffled at the beginning. Sometimes the procedures allow you to put things in order in the moment and deal with small stacks of cards. There's a number of ruses in there that allow you to get some order to do tricks at essentially setting up a trick in the open. And then there's a lot of effects, of course, that are on there that really it doesn't matter what order the cards are in. I do highly recommend it if you can find it. Liam Montier, I think it was Big Blind Media, who he has worked through in the past. I think it was called Any Shuffled Deck. You have to look it up. That's what we're talking about. Now, not material from that, and we're finally getting to the point, and those of you that know the channel, is I like these long introductions because it gets rid of the individuals that are not serious. They just want to come, find something quick, and they don't think that listening to someone talk about theory is worth their time. But since you're still here, you know that it is, okay? What we're talking about is thought of cards from a shuffled deck in use, and I've explained why you might choose to do that. Now, what I want to deal with is thought of cards with a shuffled deck in use for the common magician. I could try to sell you a bill of goods, and we have talked about this before, where someone names a card and you acquire it in the open, perhaps in a way where they do not realize that you've acquired it in the open. In most cases, those kinds of strategies seem too good to be true. And they seem too good to be true because they are. Someone might say, well, you can spread open, and they can name a card, and you can cull it or cut it, and then move on in such a way, maybe nullify what you've done with a shuffle. I think a lot of that is too good to be true. I don't think that kind of strategy really flies all that well. It's a little awkward. It does require a lot more, I think, sophisticated, non-common magician management, the kind of stuff you can't really teach, personality sorts of issues that are I think more natural to some than others. And whereas it could be taught, it would require a great deal of practice, I think, to acquire this kind of misdirection to be able to do that. I'm not talking about that. There are those strategies. I don't think they're really what they're cracked up to be. I want to suggest to you another way. You will have to make some sacrifices, but these are very useful strategies. And these are what I would call avuncular strategies. What we're going to do is we're going to use information that's freely given by the spectator or spectators, and we're going to use that information to divine something that is related to what was freely thought of, but not exactly precisely what was thought of. The reason why this works is because anything that can be related very closely to what is freely given is as good as divining the information that is freely given. This works in mentalism very, very well. Just as an example, you could have a prediction where you write something down on a piece of paper, you set it there in the open, you have people make some free selections, and then you reveal from your revelation that somebody was precise to your revelation. However, the revelation is not a precise revelation of the information they offered, but rather it indicates that they were close to it. Those of you who do mentalism, you know this principle. I don't think the principle has a name that I've ever heard from anybody, but we're thinking about this kind of a strategy. And what it is it gives me, when I write down my revelation, and we may investigate this in the future in terms of mentalism, when I write down my prediction, I'm choosing something that is sort of open-ended and available to interpretation that seems precise enough to the spectators at the end, and also tangential enough that it can't really easily be traced. Someone would really have to be doing a lot of mental gymnastics to understand what had occurred. So we're talking about that kind of strategy. That is where we're going to put our sacrifice. What does this do for us? Placing the sacrifice in that area allows us to be open, it allows us to be free, and it allows us to avoid sleights that really matter. Now, it doesn't mean we won't do some sleight of hand. It doesn't doesn't mean that we won't do some moves. It just means that whatever we do, there won't be any heat involved in it. We can feel free to do it. It won't be really an issue, okay? And most of what we can do can be done in the open, sleight free. Let's talk about the kinds of information that we're looking for. First of all, I have to get one issue out of the way. Let's say that the spectator freely names a card. The first thing I would say is that you can do this with any card trick that you do that involves a selected card. What we're doing is we're replacing pick a card with think of a card. In pick a card, it means that you have the cards available and they would randomly pick one and they would know the identity. And that card would then be reintroduced to the deck. Maybe you don't know what it is. It doesn't really matter, but it's reintroduced. It is lost in some way or not in your control, and somehow that is revealed in the end. Okay, it's brought back out. Any kind of trick where you do that can be, in most cases, except for those where you cannot know what the identity is, any one of those could be done in this manner. Think of a card, name one freely. Let's say they named the 10 of spades, and you go through and you take out the 10 of spades and you indicate. You can see you freely thought of it. It's one that you named, and you can see this is completely fair. There are no other 10 of spades in the deck. Now what you can do is reintroduce the card back into the deck. You can lose it in some way and then continue on. Now, this is where the sacrifice may not seem very good. If you do a trick in this way and you have control over losing the card back into the deck, that may seem kind of cheap. I do want to just impress upon you that there is an entire type of magic that is built on false shuffling, and we need not to feel so strongly about this issue. If you have a couple of good false shuffles, I see no reason why this should necessarily come off weak to the spectator. You ought to be able to false shuffle or control the card back into the deck. And keep in mind, we do this anyway whenever you're doing a freely selected card. By the way, it is here. Okay, it's on top. But we do this anyway. Every time you say pick a card, take a look at it, you put it back in, you control it. There's just a whole type of magic on that. What is the big deal with seeing the card, placing it back into the deck, and then controlling it in some way? What's the problem with that? There really is no problem with it. We ought to be willing to do that. What does it get us? Well, it gets us one step of, I think, refreshing involvement, and that is that the spectator was able to give information that was free to them. Even though it's not consequential really to the trick, they could have freely selected a card, it does confirm one thing. Nothing was forced upon them. It confirms something else. There are no duplicates. It confirms something else. The cards probably are not marked or tricked cards. They're not, there's nothing gimmicked about the deck if they're offering free information. Now, that may not necessarily be true, but that certainly is how the spectator is likely to feel in the moment because they've offered their information. So, sacrifice number one. Take any trick that involves selecting a card and allow them to name one. The identity is known, open to everybody. The card is reinserted. It is lost and controlled in the same way that you would have done in any other trick. That's one way to do it. And it does, I think, increase the value of the effect just because they named the card freely. So that's the first sacrifice, and you can apply that to a lot of the magic you already do. Now, for some of you, that may not be good enough or clever enough. That's fine. But again, as I said at the beginning, this is about making sacrifices. Ultimately, none of this may be good enough for you. And I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. You're just going to keep buying and learning and being dissatisfied until you find real magic. And there's no such thing. There's always a sacrifice. Okay. So here's the second idea. Avuncular information. That is information that's related in a tangent. It's not the information. It's information related to information that's offered. Starts like this. Name any card. They name any card, and this is a strategy that we've talked about on the channel and some of my penguin stuff. Let's say they name same card. They name the 10 of spades, and you go through and you find the 10 of spades. And in this case, at the top where we left it. In this case, you're going to use the 10 of spades as a marker. This is a prediction that they have made. Now, you don't necessarily have to divulge that that is what you're going to do with it. This is a key in this kind of magic. If you're going to use tangential information, avuncular information, stuff that's related to the final revelation, a key to this and a layer to this in terms of method is that they don't know what's going to happen. They've freely offered information. You remove the card, you set it aside. Now you're in a situation where you have some control because they don't know what's coming next. All they know is that they freely gave information. Now I don't have to control this card. This card's in the open. That identity is known. It does not matter what happens next. I can do this quite cleanly. I can go to any other kind of force where I'm forcing a card that is controlled openly back onto the spectator. So in this case, we're using a force not to give them information that will be used later on. We're using a force to give them a revelation based on information that was freely given. Any force will do. I could use, this is just one of the ones I've talked about before. I could say, go ahead and insert the card back into the deck somewhere in the middle, anywhere you want. They insert the card, and I say, just leave it hanging out a little bit. And then I say, let me show you. So they put it in this location. I say, let's turn it over so you can see your card there. And then I spread it out. And then I note that indeed they had a free choice where they put their card. They put it right here. And what's really fascinating about this is that an identity that they freely thought of, they placed back into the deck anywhere that they chose. I did nothing to the cards. All of this was in the open. Somehow they have found the mate to their freely chosen card. So in this case, we have a revelation based on a free choice in apparently no moves at all. Now the truth is that there were two open moves. First of all, I had to acquire the card of my interest, not their interest. This is the card of their interest, but because they don't know what's coming next, there's no other card of interest except for the one that's of my interest. Very simply, all we did is that as I was going through the deck to find the 10 of spades, I just separated out the mate because I know how the trick ends. When I found the mate, I put a little bit of a jog there right above it so I can see it. When I collected the cards, I broke at that spot, cut, and I cut that card to the top. An open table shift. Okay, it's just an open spread shift. And it wasn't even covert. And I get away with this because they don't know what I'm doing. We've talked about this before. This obviously can also be done with just a spread call. You know, I love the spread call. Some people are very nervous about the spread call. They're nervous about getting caught. You can get caught with a spread call. I actually recently got caught with a spread call, but it didn't matter. And this is one way that it worked. I was doing an ambitious card routine. That was a trick I was going to do. Teenage kid, doesn't know magic, doesn't do magic, but I said, I was doing a move where I said, name any card from the center. They named one out. They said the 4 of hearts. And I covered it and called it. And he said, you just took it out. He said, you just took it out. And I immediately know that I got caught. He saw something or perceived something, his thinking was ahead of mine, of where I thought it should be. And what did I do in that situation? I immediately closed the spread with that card where it was. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you took it out. And I said, no, it's still right here. 4 of hearts, right? And then I covered it up, and then I did it again. He said, you did it again. I said, what are you talking about? And I showed him the card. Now I know at this point that I'm not going to get away with what I want to do. So what I did is I said, I don't know what you mean. Here, let's take it out. And I put it on top, and I went to another phase. So I left it out jog. And then what did I do? Well, I did a spread call, but notice what I did next. I spread through, and I found another heart. Case 4 of hearts, 7 of hearts right here. I found another heart, and I spread called that. I said, look, I just want to show you there's only 1 4 of hearts in the deck. He didn't notice that call. He didn't notice that call because his card of interest is the 4 of hearts. You can do a spread call on anything that they're not interested in, and it doesn't even have to be a good one. So that's a way in which you can use a call. What I did is I called this other heart above his, which is now sitting at the top of the deck. I closed it up, and now I've got my 7 of hearts sitting on top of the 4. I take the 7, I place it into the deck, and then I push it in, covering the index, and I show the top so you can just see the top pips. I say you can see it going in. I close it up, and then, of course, it pops to the top. Mind blown, and I was really no worse for the wear. At the end of that, in his mind, he didn't see anything. He was making some guesses that weren't relevant to what I was doing. So just a word on the spread call. Even if you don't feel good about it, and even if you get caught out, there's a way in which you can use a spread call that is covert, and that is when you're doing a spread call, good or bad, on cards that are not of interest. This is perfect for this kind of situation whenever you're going to do a mate revelation. So in this case, let's say they say the 5 of spades. I want to go for the mate, the 5 of clubs. I'm going to spread through, and I see the 5 of spades, if it comes before, and I can out jog it. And I can say, you can see there's only 1 5 of spades. And as I go through, I'm looking for the 5 of clubs. I call that to the top. I take out the 5 of spades, and now I'm controlled for that same revelation. Okay, so I can put this back in. They have them insert it face down, and then I can do my reversal. And there you have it. Okay, so that is one revelation. Another revelation could be that they reveal it maybe from a, one of my favorite ones is the cross-cut force or the crisscross force. That's a really great one, and especially coming off of a call like that or open spread shift. If they name the 5 of clubs, I've already put the 5 of spades on top. I can have them just cut the deck straight away, and I've got my revelation. It's right here where they cut the deck, apparently. So that is another way that I can get to it. Any kind of revelation from a controlled card. Any kind of force from a controlled card. I could do, I don't really like it that much for this. The cut deeper force is a good one from a top card. It's a good one, particularly I find that it's only good when you're using more than one person, because you have to justify here, you cut a little bit, cut a small packet turnover, and just to make this more complicated so that we know we're not all in on it, why don't you cut more cards, cut deeper, turn that packet over. Together you've chosen. I think that's a better way to justify it. My favorite way of using the cut deeper force as just an aside is that I prefer to use it specifically for a 51 faces north effect. That is the prediction where you have all the cards facing up. The spectator chooses one card to keep facing down. I've covered that on the channel before. That is an extremely natural way to incorporate the cut deeper force that I think is just tailor-made for that force. Complete tangent there and off the wagon for today. But any kind of force, any force where you can force a controlled card allows you to have them name a card freely, make a revelation based on something they chose freely where you apparently had no control over the cards. because they don't know what the outcome is going to be. And it's very mind-blowing because the effect is that you divined something that I gave you. I just thought of it. And you can even lean in on this and say, and this is from a card you merely thought of. You can say that at the end to upsell the effect in the recap. The next concept I want to talk about is very similar. Rather than finding a card that is a mate to the card, you can have a selection that they make freely, but they don't know that they made it. Okay, and this looks like this. You have them create a composite. This feels like equivoque, but it is not. It's a free choice. They just don't know, again, based on this principle of not knowing where we're going next. They are going to choose a value in a suit. And it gives us the opportunity to have access to the cards to get control over the card of interest. It works kind of like this. You could, again, do it from an open spread shift or do it from a call. Either one is fine. Let's say we do it from the table. You say, name a card. We've covered this before, but I just want to lean in on this today, on this topic of sacrifices. The sacrifices is that we're going to use the information they give in two pieces to formulate a card they thought of that we will reveal that card. Okay, and this is good for all kinds of magic and allows us to get one ahead on a million effects on freely thought of card. You can do any card at any number with this. You could do an open prediction with this because they've created the open prediction. The open prediction truly is in the open, and you can do an open prediction. You can have them do all the work and find the card using any force that you want to, just like we talked about. But we make a composite. They name a card. Let's say they say the 7 of clubs. And what you do is you go through. Now, I'm thinking of right now, I'm going to be thinking of the 7 of hearts or the 7 of spades, the off-color related card. So as I go through, I want to break apart the red sevens. So they said 7 of clubs. I see 7 of hearts here. I'm going to put a jog above that. And then the 7 of diamonds, I'm going to put a jog above that I can see. And I find there's 7 of clubs. They're not noticing this because they have no idea. They have no idea what I'm doing next. This is totally in the open. They have their 7 of hearts. Now I say, think of another card. Maybe I ask somebody else, but I could ask the same person. Look, name another card, but a different color and a different value, completely different. The key is that I said different color. What they now have to name is a spade, or they have to name a heart or a diamond. Any heart or any diamond, and not a 7. Okay, that's important because I'm going for one of the red 7s. Let's say they say the queen of diamonds. I now know that I'm going for the 7 of diamonds, which has been partitioned off over here. I find the queen of diamonds, I take out the queen of diamonds, and I set it on top of the 7 of clubs. When I pick up the cards, I'm going to stop above the queen, or above the 7 of diamonds, break, pick up, and continue, and now I shifted openly the 7 of diamonds to the top of the deck. Now I can do this revelation any way I want. Now there's 2 ways to go ahead with this. I could do the revelation, get the card out there, face down and chosen. Maybe they do it, maybe I do it. It doesn't really matter. I get it out there and then I explain that they chose the 7 of clubs. The 7 is our value, and then they chose the queen of diamonds. The diamonds is our suit. And we had a prediction sitting in the open the entire time. The 7 of diamonds, a card that they thought of. And then I do the revelation. Alternatively, before the selection is made, you can have it controlled to your location, on the top in this case, and you can explain the composite before you go through the procedure of finding it. I find that this is a little bit stronger because this is more like an open prediction where there's stakes involved. Now you know and they know what the interest is, but because you're too far ahead of them and your hands off at this point, it seems so much more impossible. I say you pick the 7 of clubs, we'll use the value 7, and then you pick the queen of diamonds, we'll use the suit, the diamonds. So now we have the 7 of diamonds. That's our prediction. It's your prediction. You thought of this card. It's out in the open. We know there's a 7 of diamonds in there. You freely thought of it. Let's see what we can do to find it. Then you go through your procedure, and of course it's going to be located in some way. Okay, any kind of force to get you there from a controlled card, you're all set. Another strategy. So we have finding a mate, we have a composite thought of card, and the last idea is to reintroduce a card, and you can really use either of these. You can use the mate, you can use the composite, or you can go back to the first example where it is a freely named card. Let's say they name the 9 of clubs. You take out the 9 of clubs. You apparently lose the 9 of clubs into the deck. And you say, look, I just want to make this completely fair. Why don't you go ahead and shuffle the cards? And what you do is you turn over the deck, they shuffle the cards, and you cop that sucker out. You just palm it out, you comp it out, you keep it in your control, you allow them to take control. And if you're comfortable with this kind of magic where you palm, you can always palm out a card that is of interest and well known. That's very simple. Maybe not a common magician strategy, but for those of you that are very comfortable with that kind of magic, to keep control, you could always cop or palm it out, have them shuffle the deck, and now you're in a situation where not only have they offered a specific identity, and again, you could do this. You could palm or cop out a composite identity or a mate identity, which means that the heat is even lower because they don't know where the trick is going. Palming or copping out a card that is of interest, that's a little more hairy, but some of you may be very good at that. I palm it out, I cop it out, they have control. Now you have a situation where they freely thought of a card. It's verifiably lost in the deck because they're the ones that shuffled it. You take the cards back, you reintroduce it, and now it's controlled to a location. That is the last possibility for a named card. So these are all sacrifices. You're either sacrificing some kind of control by losing the card back in the deck and just using freely named cards rather than selected cards. I find that to be very refreshing. It does confirm that there's no force involved so far as they know. You can use a mate, which keeps you ahead on the revelation and gives you miles and miles of room to work with in terms of control. Or you can use a composite revelation where they are freely choosing an identity, but they're unaware that they have chosen an identity until you reveal it to them. But it is their choice nonetheless, and it does feel that way. One thing on that real quick is it is justified. It is justified. Whenever you do a composite selection, when you do this, you are creating an open prediction and you are setting aside something that is verified. And it's as if they have written down their prediction and placed it there, freely selected. We're just doing it in a different way. We're using known cards to keep record of what they're doing. It's a justifiable procedure. It doesn't seem out of place or unnecessary because it is holding out information for everybody to verifiably know. You don't have to overly justify it, but you can say, if you want to say, now we'll have this here so that we know that you didn't change your mind. That's one thing you can do. I've never found a need to do that, but if you feel like you want to, you could throw a line in like that. Just so you can't change your mind on us, we have this here. You have this value in this suit. This is what we're interested in. And, you have, I think, an over justification. I think it's merely justified as a prediction in of itself. It's not really extra. So you have that as well. And then, of course, the last thing we talked about is merely copping out after something's been lost. Keep in mind, this is something always to remember. When we're thinking about a pre-show, in-show pre-show, creating a situation where the trick begins at a certain time. Every trick begins at a certain time. You could say that I've done an effect where the deck was shuffled and out of my control. And you could do that from the box. And what's unusual about that is that there's nothing confirmed about that at all because the deck came out of the box and no one ever saw a shuffle happen. They didn't do a shuffle and they didn't see you shuffle. In fact, you have more confirmation if you have the deck in your control and you do a convincing shuffle. You're actually further ahead in that environment, but you're also further ahead in that you've had hands-on and have done some control. There's a little bit of a paradox in that, right? The deck had to have been shuffled at some time. The deck had to have been handled at some time. The implications of that are not necessarily apparent to the spectator. I think it's okay in many cases to take control of the deck, do some kind of convincing false shuffle, or do some kind of control that does allow you to relinquish control of the deck to the spectator and allows them to shuffle, whereas you still have control. The last idea on that I want to bring up is the concept of some automatic placement procedure. If you use an automatic placement procedure where they are actually controlling the cards under your guidance, where they think they are shuffling the cards, a procedure that seems like a shuffle, boy, that can be really powerful as an extra layer. Take any one of these ideas, and we have a card controlled. Let's say it's the Ace of Diamonds is going to be our controlled card. Maybe they've done a composite, maybe it's a mate, maybe it's been introduced to the deck, and maybe it's been controlled to the top in a false shuffle or a false mix of some kind. I have control of the card. It was freely thought of or indicated in some way. I now allow them to do the next step. You could have them do a shuffling procedure. This is often associated with a dealing kind of procedure or a dealt crisscross force kind of procedure. But it simply goes like this, forcing from the top. You could say, go ahead and deal out the cards one at a time right here. You might even tell them, go ahead, deal off one card, place it down. Go ahead, deal another one. Keep dealing. In fact, deal as many as you want. You can deal several cards at a time. In fact, you can mix the cards all you want. What we've done in this moment is we've actually had them deal the first card and controlled it themselves to the bottom. They can go through this procedure as much as they want, shuffling and dealing. In their minds and in their experience, they have just shuffled the entire deck, and there's no control that you have over it, except for the fact that you controlled one card. You just controlled the top card to the bottom. Now we're dealing with a revelation from the bottom. Pick your force, whatever force you want to do. Doesn't matter. You can either pick up the deck and do it, or you can use a spectator-guided situation where you have them do the crisscross force into that, or you can do the same kind of turnover control. Let's say you have them take a joker, or if it is a mate revelation, have them insert it anywhere, and you can do this. You can do this move, and then you can reveal it, knowing now that the control is from the bottom. There's their card. So there's all kinds of ways in which you can have the spectator apparently take control of the deck, and it doesn't have to necessarily involve you copying it out. Once you have control, there's a lot of leading that you can give to the spectator to give them apparent control in the selection. A lot of ways to do that, and you can use any kind of force that you want to accomplish that end. So where is your sacrifice going to be? You have to make sacrifices in every single trick. There's no such thing as a trick that does not make a sacrifice, not a single one. There's always going to be a sacrifice. As a general rule, many magicians would say that the bigger the sacrifice that you make, the more powerful the trick. I don't think that's necessarily true. But it could be true. I think that you should think about some places where you have to make a very small sacrifice, very tiny ones that we should be willing to do in order to make something very powerful. And I think a small sacrifice to make is in a mate revelation or in a composite selection. I think that's a really small sacrifice to really get to the same end of a thought of card kind of situation. So that's my personal feeling on it. All kinds of stuff we talked about here, and hopefully as you look at my long form videos and we talk very broadly about concepts, it's my desire not that I give you a comprehensive look at anything. My goal is to give you a springboard off of which you can use the material you already use and go steps and steps further from there. You probably, hopefully, if I've done this right, you probably have a whole repertoire of moves or strategies that you use in the magic that you do comfortably, no matter your level, that you can relate to these concepts, and then you can springboard from that into a realm of all kinds of different ideas that maybe you haven't considered that will really up your game. So that is Freely Thought of Card Magic. Another discussion on that from a shuffled deck in use, another discussion on that, but mostly about the principle of making sacrifices. Where do you want to make your sacrifices to do magic? First of all, that is powerful, but second, that is powerful and comfortable. Comfortable for you. If your magic is comfortable to you, you have the best chance at being good at what you're doing in your presentation. I don't think that's stated enough. In any kind of discipline, as a musician, if you're an amateur musician out there, I would tell you the same thing. Let's say you are not a virtuosic musician. You don't have a virtuosic command over the instrument you have. Let's say you play guitar, and you know some chords. Maybe you can sing. It is better for you to use what is accessible to you and comfortable to you in the moment of performance, so that you can have a good performance. Never forgetting that we're always trying to practice in a way that we're increasing our skills all the time and trying to get better. Never stagnating, always trying to get better. But when it comes to performance, it's essential to understand that you need to perform using tools that are comfortable and accessible to you, so that the performance itself can be as impactful as you can make it. One little thing I'll leave you with. Every few years, 4 years, or 2 years, depending on which one you're watching, we see the Olympics. And you see these athletes at the top of their game, in the prime of their lives, in terms of their physical fitness, breaking world and Olympic records all the time. And we wonder, how is this possible? How is it that they can do this year after year? When do we hit the human limit? And the reason why this can go on and on and on for decades and decades is because of one simple truth. Those records are broken all the time in practice. Personal bests are beaten all the time in practice. It happens all the time. The fact is that nobody really performs at the absolute top of their game when it comes to the heat of the moment, when the focus and the stress is on. You should assume that you'll perform at about 80% of your capability when the stress is on. What does that mean for you? It means that you want to make sure that you're using methods that are well within your capability and accessible to you. That athlete that breaks a pool personal best or an Olympic record, in terms of speed in a swimming event, it's not that they can't do that any other time and they accomplish it the first ever in their lives and in the lives of anybody in that moment when the heat is on. The deal is that they're fast enough to pull that off in practice. And in this moment, when the pressure was on, they came above themselves and they were able to do it there with the world watching. Okay? Keep that in mind. It's a good principle. Always use material that you are comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with it, it's not ready for prime time. Unless you're doing it for your cronies in magic and you're practicing. Okay? You're testing yourself to see what you can get away with where you're getting feedback. I think that's the only time. Obviously, as a musician, when I was in school, in the trumpet studio, and I was playing in preparation for a recital, I would take risks when I'm in studio because I'm getting feedback on what I'm doing. But when it came time for the performance, it was essential that I was working with a repertoire that I was comfortable with, because I knew the stress was going to be on, and I had to play well, and I wanted my music to be impactful to people. How can it be impactful to people if it's weak, and if it's loose, and if it's falling apart? It can't work that way. So, strategies for the con magician out there on making sacrifices. Where are you going to make your sacrifice? Because you have to make one somewhere. Good luck with that. Happy magicking and Merry Christmas.